The hospital room was silent, a stillness so thick it clung to the air, choking every breath. Sergeant Cole had fought to hold on, for hours, days even. But in the end, it seemed like all the doctors had exhausted their knowledge. A handful of shifts later, 20 doctors came and went, offering only apologies and sterile words. They couldn't pinpoint what had happened to him. They couldn't explain how his heart seemed to race in the middle of the night. How his body was shutting down despite their best efforts. His pulse was weak, erratic, and none of the machines could keep him stable. Outside, the storm raged. A torrential downpour drummed against the windows, a relentless echo to the chaos inside his body. His wife, Lily, sat beside him, her eyes red from days of tearless sorrow, clutching his hand as though it were the only tether keeping her grounded. She whispered prayers to the darkness, but the room gave nothing back. And just when hope seemed out of reach, something unexpected happened. A soft whimper came from the corner of the room, a gentle scratching at the door. It was the kind of sound that, in any other moment, she would have ignored. But here, in this strange, sorrowful pause, it was a voice of possibility. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a German shepherd, wagging his tail gently. His eyes locked onto Lily's, a silent plea in them. She didn't know why, but instinct told her to trust the dog. His presence felt like a spark in the dark. And when he padded softly toward Cole's bed, sniffing around him, his expression changed, as if he knew something the doctors did not. The sterile white walls of the hospital room were suffocating, oppressive. Sergeant Cole had always been the strong, unshakable type, a protector, a warrior who had faced danger head-on more times than he cared to remember. But now, in this room, his own body was betraying him, and no amount of courage or willpower could make the doctors find the solution. The battle he fought now wasn't against criminals or terrorists. It was against something invisible, something the medical team could not name, something beyond their expertise. And as the days dragged on, it became more and more evident that no one could help him. It had started as something small, almost trivial, a few bouts of fatigue that Cole brushed off as nothing more than stress from work. Long shifts, late nights, they were part of the job. But then the chest pains began, sharp and uncomfortable, gnawing at him until he couldn't ignore them any longer. He had always been tough, always been the one to put others first, but something inside him was now screaming for help. Still, he brushed it aside. Soldiers didn't show weakness. Officers didn't get sick. It wasn't until one night, when the pain intensified, that he finally collapsed. He couldn't breathe. His heart seemed to be racing in his chest, out of control, beating wildly like a drum in a parade. That's when he was rushed to the hospital, and his world started to shift from certainty to confusion. The doctors were baffled. They ran every test imaginable, heart scans, blood work, MRI, but the results never matched the symptoms. One doctor said it was stress-induced tachycardia. Another suggested it could be a rare heart condition, but the treatments didn't seem to work. And so they kept trying different drugs, different methods, but each one felt more like a shot in the dark than a real solution. They asked him 1,000 questions, poked and prodded, hoping to catch a glimpse of something that would make sense of his condition. But nothing ever fit. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Cole's body seemed to wither. His once strong frame was now limp, his muscles weak and fatigued. His face, always tanned and healthy, had paled, and the once sharp gleam in his eyes had dulled. He could feel himself slipping away, not just physically but emotionally as well. He couldn't hold on to hope. How could he? His doctors, the supposed experts, had no answers. Every time they entered the room, they came with a new theory, a new guess, but none of them seemed to bring any relief. His body was failing, and no one had a clue why. Lily, his wife, sat by his side every day, refusing to leave. She had always been his strength, the one who encouraged him when he felt unsure, the one who believed in him when the world doubted him. But now, Lily found herself facing an unimaginable kind of helplessness. She had always been the one to calm him during the storms, to help him find the light when things seemed dark. But in this moment, there was no light. There was only an oppressive silence in the room, filled with the beeping of machines and the soft rustle of hospital gowns. She could barely remember the last time she slept. Her eyes were red and swollen from the days of silent weeping. She prayed, she begged, she made deals with God, but nothing seemed to change. The worst part was that she couldn't do anything to help. She couldn't fight this battle for him, couldn't take the pain away. She was stuck in a place where hope seemed like a distant memory, a dream long lost in the murky haze of medical jargon and uncertainty. She felt herself unraveling slowly, but she kept her composure for Cole's sake. He needed her, and she wouldn't let him see how deeply she was affected. Every night, she would sit by his bedside holding his hand, listening to the sound of his shallow breath. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor became both a comfort and a curse. It was a sign that he was still hanging on, but also a reminder that time was running out. The doctors couldn't offer a cure, only more tests, more theories. And each day, Cole's condition worsened, his body weakening with every passing hour. He was no longer the man who had once raced through life with unrelenting force. He was now just a shell of that man, tired, defeated, barely hanging on. The sound of the rain outside only added to the sense of gloom that had settled over the room. It had been raining for days now, the sky thick with dark clouds. The storm outside mirrored the one inside their hearts. There was a strange stillness in the air, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, something to break the tension. Max, their German shepherd, had been kept outside the room for most of the days. The hospital was strict about animals on the premises, and they didn't allow pets in patient rooms. But Max was family. He had been Cole's constant companion for years, always by his side, always ready to protect, always ready to love. The bond between man and dog was undeniable, and now, as Cole lay helpless in that sterile room, Max seemed to know that something was wrong. He had always been sensitive to Cole's moods, to the subtle shifts in the air that others didn't notice. But Max wasn't just sensitive, he was loyal. He would never abandon Cole, not now. So one evening, when the door to the hospital room was slightly ajar, Max pushed his way through, tail wagging tentatively. Lily looked up, surprised. The dog had never been allowed in before, but something in his eyes told her he needed to be there. She moved aside, letting him in. Max padded quietly over to the side of Cole's bed, sniffing the air around him. He sat beside Lily, his body warm against her legs. The dog's presence, though simple, was grounding. She could feel the weight of the room lift just slightly, as if Max were a bridge between the helplessness of their situation and the flicker of hope that refused to die. Max's eyes locked with Lily's, and for a moment she felt as if he was silently communicating with her, his soft whimper breaking the silence of the room. She didn't know why, but she felt a pull to touch Cole's chest once again. She placed her hand there, hoping to feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, but instead she felt an unevenness, a strange fluctuation. His heart was still beating, but it wasn't right. It wasn't normal. Lily froze, her hand resting over Cole's chest, her breath caught in her throat. Max's eyes didn't leave her face. He had sensed something. He knew. The doctors had missed it, but Max, the dog, had found what they could not. He had found the source of Cole's suffering. And in that moment, Lily knew what she had to do. Max wasn't just a dog. He was their last hope, their unlikely savior. The bond between them all, now more powerful than ever, would lead them toward the one thing they had been desperately searching for. An answer. The following days after Max's quiet intervention were filled with a strange blend of disbelief and cautious optimism. For Lily, each hour that passed felt like a war of its own. On the one hand, there was the overwhelming relief of knowing something had finally been detected, that they weren't entirely at the mercy of the unknown. On the other hand, there was the crushing weight of doubt. Could it really be that simple? Could a dog with no medical training have found what the doctors could not? The questions churned in her mind as she sat beside Cole's bed, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest and waiting, always waiting, for something to shift. Max was no longer just a companion. He had become a silent guardian, a presence that grounded Lily in a way that nothing else could. She had always known that Max was special, that there was something more to him than simply being a dog. He had a keen intuition that went beyond the ordinary. But now, as Cole lay motionless, connected to tubes and wires, Max's every move seemed charged with purpose. He sat quietly at Cole's side, never straying far from his owner's bed. His presence was a constant reminder to Lily of the delicate balance they were walking and the desperate need for answers. Lily had begun to wonder if there was more to Max's actions than mere instinct. What had made him approach Cole in the first place? What had he sensed when no one else could? She thought back to the way he circled the bed, sniffing at Cole's chest before sitting down beside her. It had felt like something primal, an ancient understanding between human and animal, something beyond logic. And now she found herself following that instinct. She had no scientific explanation for it, no way to prove it, but deep down, she knew Max had found a clue, a missing piece of the puzzle that no one else could see. The night was always the hardest. As the hospital grew quieter, Lily's mind would race, turning over every moment of the day. The doctor's words from earlier echoed in her ears. "We don't know what it is, Lily. We've never seen anything like it. It's so rare." But then they spoke of hope, of the possibility of saving him, a slim chance, but a chance nonetheless. Max had brought that hope, that he had been the bridge between the hopelessness of the situation and the possibility of recovery. Without him, Lily couldn't shake the thought that they would still be wandering in the dark. Max's behavior grew even more pronounced in the hours that followed. It wasn't just his presence anymore. It was the way he seemed to sense the smallest changes in Cole's condition. He would nudge Lily gently with his nose when she seemed too exhausted to stay awake, pulling her attention back to Cole's needs. He would sit near the machines, as though guarding them, his eyes never leaving the monitors, as if he were watching for any signs of life, any sign that Cole's body might be fighting back. It was on the third night after Max's arrival that things took a turn. Cole's heart monitor had been fluctuating all day, erratic spikes followed by unnerving drops. Lily's heart sank as she watched the numbers shift violently on the screen, each one seemingly bringing them closer to the edge. She was on the brink of calling the nurse when Max, who had been resting quietly on the floor beside the bed, suddenly jumped up, his ears perked, his gaze fixed on Cole's chest. Without warning, he let out a low growl, a sound so unlike anything Lily had ever heard from him. The intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. Max was alerting her to something more than just a dog's instinct. Lily hesitated for a moment, her fingers frozen against the edge of the bed. The growl had been so deep, so resonant, that it felt as though the dog had tapped into something hidden beneath the surface. It was the kind of sound that sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She stood up quickly, rushing to call the nurse. When the nurse arrived, Max stepped aside, his eyes still trained on Cole. The nurse adjusted the machines, muttering softly to herself as she studied the readouts. She looked up at Lily, her expression blank. "The readings are strange," she said, "but they're within the margin of error." "I think it's just the machines." Lily's heart dropped, but Max didn't seem convinced. He paced near Cole's bed, his body tense. He nudged Lily again, pressing his head into her side as though pleading for her to understand. Lily stood there, her thoughts racing, trying to figure out if the dog was reacting to something she couldn't see, something that had escaped the doctor's attention. In a moment of pure instinct, Lily stepped closer to Cole's side. The quiet hum of the machines filled the room, but it was the silence of the room itself that drew her attention. There was something off. She placed her hand on Cole's chest again, and this time her fingers found the same erratic beat. It wasn't just the machines. Something was physically wrong. It wasn't a mere fluctuation in the numbers. Cole's heart was failing. She could feel it with every beat, every irregular rhythm. Max sat quietly beside her, as if urging her to act. The nurse, still hovering near the foot of the bed, seemed uncertain, unsure of what to do next. Lily was torn, unsure of how to explain what she felt. Max had known first. The dog had sensed it when no one else had, and Lily couldn't ignore that anymore. She had spent too many days feeling helpless, relying on the doctor's expertise, but now she knew that she had to trust her instincts and Max's. After what seemed like an eternity, the nurse finally acknowledged that something wasn't right, though she couldn't explain why. She called for a senior physician to reassess Cole's condition. Within moments, another doctor arrived, and after a careful reevaluation, a decision was made to run another round of tests, a deeper dive into Cole's heart and its electrical signals. This time, the tests showed the true nature of Cole's illness, a rare arrhythmia that had been hiding in plain sight. It was exactly what Max had sensed. The dog's instincts had been the key that unlocked the mystery. In that moment, Lily's heart filled with both relief and wonder. Max, the unlikely savior, had saved Cole's life not through force or power, but through the simple truth of his presence and his intuitive connection to his owner. As the doctors prepared for surgery, Lily's eyes never left Max. He had given them the chance to save Cole, and now, as the medical team prepped for a life-saving procedure, she knew that they owed it all to him. Max had saved Cole, and now it was up to the doctors to finish what the dog had started. Lily's heart was racing as the minutes stretched into hours. The uncertainty of the situation had always loomed over her, but now, after the tests, there was a glimmer of hope. They were about to find out what had been causing Cole's heart to fail, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that there might be a way to save him, but the waiting was unbearable. It was as if time itself had slowed, each second heavy with the weight of what was to come. The sound of the machines, the occasional footsteps of nurses passing by, and the soft rustling of paper all became a blur in her mind. She didn't care about the noises. She only cared about the outcome of the tests. Max sat at her feet, his warm body providing a quiet comfort. He had been unwavering in his presence, never leaving Cole's side, always vigilant, always attuned to something she couldn't understand. The dog's eyes were fixed on Cole's bed as if he too was waiting for the results that would determine whether Cole would pull through or not. Lily ran her fingers through Max's fur, seeking solace in his simple, unspoken loyalty. Max was the one constant in this whirlwind of uncertainty. His calm, his intuition, and his unwavering focus had brought her back from the edge of despair. And now, she couldn't help but wonder if he wasn't just a dog after all. The nurse entered quietly, carrying a clipboard. Her face was neutral, unreadable, but there was a subtle change in her posture as she approached the bed. She hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "Miss Cole," she began, her voice soft but steady. The tests came back. Lily held her breath, her grip on Max tightening. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. The nurse glanced at the door before speaking again, almost as though she didn't want to reveal too much too quickly. "We found something. It's rare, but it's there. A cardiac arrhythmia, an electrical malfunction in his heart rhythm. It's been misread before, and it's often dismissed, but it's there. That's why the heart rate kept fluctuating, why his breathing became erratic. The signals weren't clear, and no one thought to look for this specific condition. But now we know." Lily felt a wave of shock wash over her, followed by an overwhelming sense of relief. She could barely process the words. Cole wasn't dying of an unknown cause. There was a name for the problem, a diagnosis, something the doctors could treat. It wasn't a death sentence. He had been misdiagnosed, overlooked, but now they had the answer. "But what does this mean?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. She needed to understand, needed to know what the next step would be. The nurse smiled softly, her gaze flicking over to Max. "It means that with the right treatment, he can recover. It'll take time, and there will be some risk, but we can correct the arrhythmia. We have a few options for stabilization, medication, possibly a pacemaker if necessary, but we can start working on it immediately. His condition isn't as severe as we initially thought. He's strong, and with the right care, he can make it through." Lily felt her knees give way, and she had to steady herself by holding onto the side of the bed. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. The pressure that had been building inside her chest for days suddenly released. She didn't care that she was exhausted, that her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, that her body ached from the emotional strain. All that mattered was that Cole was going to survive. For a moment, Lily couldn't speak. She simply looked at the nurse, then back at Cole, then at Max, who was still sitting by her feet, his tail wagging just slightly. She felt a deep sense of gratitude welling up inside her, not just for the doctors who had finally found the answer, but for Max, who had led them here. If it hadn't been for the dog's subtle actions, the growl, the instinct to guide her hand to Cole's chest, they would never have uncovered the truth. It was as if Max had sensed something hidden beneath the surface, something the doctors couldn't see. He had been their silent guide, their unseen savior, from the moment he entered that room. Max's role in the whole ordeal hadn't been lost on the nurse. She gave a small, knowing smile as she observed the bond between the dog and his owner. "I don't know how to explain it," she said softly, "but animals like him often seem to know when something is wrong. It's incredible, really." Lily nodded, her heart full. "He's not just a dog," she whispered. He's everything." As the nurse left to inform the rest of the medical team, Lily stayed by Cole's side, her hand still resting on his chest. She was still processing the whirlwind of emotions, the fear, the uncertainty, the relief. But above all, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe, to let the weight of the world fall away. Cole was going to be okay. Max had saved him. She looked down at the dog, who was now curled up at her feet, his eyes softly closing. He had been by Cole's side through it all, and now he was her anchor in this sea of emotion. Hours passed before the doctors returned with a plan. They would stabilize Cole's condition overnight and begin administering the treatment in the morning. The options were straightforward: medication to regulate his heart's rhythm and, if necessary, a pacemaker to assist with any irregularities. But the important thing was that they had an answer. They had a way forward. And with it, hope. As the night settled over the hospital, the storm outside began to subside. The rain softened into a gentle drizzle and the clouds parted just enough to allow the first light of dawn to filter through the blinds. The world outside was changing, just as it was inside the hospital room. For the first time in days, Lily could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Max, as if sensing the change, stood up and padded over to Cole's bed. He rested his head gently on the side of the mattress, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Lily smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Max had been more than just a companion. He had been their savior. And now, as Cole's breathing began to steady, she knew that this was the beginning of the next chapter in their lives, a chapter that they would face together, with Max at their side. The days following Cole's diagnosis felt like a surreal blur to Lily. The sharp clarity that came with knowing the truth, knowing what had been wrong all along, was slowly replaced by the physical toll of it. It was the unspoken connection between the three of them that filled the space with life. It wasn't the beeping of machines that kept Lily grounded. It was the presence of Max, the sound of his steady breathing as he rested, the reassuring sense of him always being there. Lily watched as Max shifted from his spot beside the bed, slowly moving to the window, his nose pressed against the glass as though he too was waiting for something. For a change, for the promise of a future that had seemed so uncertain just days before. Lily followed his gaze, her eyes drawn to the soft light streaming through the clouds. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in days the sky was clear, the horizon open and wide. It felt like a new beginning, not just for Cole, but for their entire family. Max had brought them here to this moment, this second chance. And so Lily began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in days: gratitude. For the doctors who had fought for Cole's life, for the nurses who attended to him with care, for the countless small gestures that had helped them through the darkest days. But most of all, she felt gratitude for Max, for a dog who had no medical training, no degree in science, no voice to speak, but who had saved the love of her life. Max had been more than just a pet. He had been a guide, an ally, a hero. As the days passed and Cole began to regain his strength, the recovery process was slow but steady. His heart rate stabilized, the erratic spikes and drops now just a distant memory. The medication worked, as the doctors had promised. But it wasn't just the drugs that had worked. It was the care, the love, the quiet moments of healing that no prescription could provide. Max's presence in the room, his unwavering devotion to Cole, his silent vigilance, became a constant reminder that sometimes healing came in the most unlikely of forms. In the mornings, when the sunlight poured through the windows, Cole would sit up in bed slowly but surely. His body ached, but the warmth of the sun seemed to breathe new life into him. Max would always be right there, waiting for Cole to move, ready to nudge him forward when he needed it. Cole had always been the one to take care of Max, to be the protector, but now it was as if the roles had reversed. Max was looking out for him, reminding him that no matter how much the world changed, their bond would remain unshaken. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the hospital walls, Cole reached out a shaky hand to scratch behind Max's ears. The dog's tail wagged gently in response, his eyes soft and trusting. Cole's voice was hoarse, but it carried the weight of gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he murmured, his fingers running through the dog's fur. Max looked up at him, his eyes bright and unblinking, as if he understood the gravity of those words. He had never asked for praise, never sought recognition. But in that moment, he understood his place in the world. He had given Cole the greatest gift, the gift of life. Lily watched the exchange from the corner of the room, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never fully understood the depth of the bond between a person and their dog, but now, watching Cole and Max, she saw it with clarity. It wasn't just about companionship, it was about survival, about loyalty, about love in its purest form. Max had given them a second chance. He had fought for Cole when no one else could, And now he was the quiet sentinel of their recovery. There were still challenges ahead: physical therapy, recovery, and rebuilding the strength that Cole had lost. But for the first time in days, the future didn't seem so uncertain. Cole had fought his way back from the brink with Max by his side every step of the way. The bond between them had only deepened, and Lily knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that they would face whatever came next together. Max had saved Cole. And in doing so, he had reminded them all of the most important truth of all, that sometimes the greatest healers come in the form of those we least expect. In this case, it was a dog, who had no voice but whose presence spoke louder than any words ever could. As the evening descended, and the hospital room grew quiet once more, the only sound that could be heard was the soft rustling of Max's fur as he lay by Cole's side. The storm had passed both outside and within, and in its wake a new beginning had emerged. Max had led them here, and together they would build a future filled with life, love, and the quiet bond that had saved them all. The hospital room, once a place of sterile clinical white, had gradually transformed. The air was no longer thick with the tension of uncertainty, nor was it weighed down by the heavy silence that had lingered for days. Instead, there was a quiet warmth that had settled in the corners of the room, a feeling of peace, of hope, of something fragile yet strong. It was the quiet hum of life returning to Cole, the steady rhythm of his heart now that the storm inside him had passed. Lily sat at his side, watching as he slowly regained his strength. His chest rose and fell with an even rhythm, each breath more confident than the last. It was a gradual process, of course. There were still moments when the physical toll of his illness made him falter, but there was a resilience in his eyes now, a fire that had been ignited, not just by the promise of survival, but by the love and loyalty that had pulled him through the darkest of times. The bond between Cole and Max had deepened in a way that Lily couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the fact that Max had saved him. It wasn't just the dog's silent guidance, his instinctive knowledge that had led them to the right diagnosis. It was something more, something primal and sacred. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. He was the protector, the guardian, the healer. Max had never left Cole's side during the recovery. Even when Cole was asleep, his breathing shallow from the medications, Max remained close by. His presence was a constant comfort, a reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. He would nudge Cole gently with his nose if the human moved too much in his sleep, and in the mornings he would sit patiently at the edge of the bed, his eyes always watching, as though waiting for Cole to. It was as though Max, in his own quiet way, was guiding Cole back to life. The mornings were the hardest for Cole. He would wake up, his body aching from the long hours of immobility, his mind still fogged by the medication. But the sight of Max always there waiting for him was the first thing he saw when his eyes fluttered open. It was as if the dog was a lifeline to reality, reminding him that, despite everything that had happened, he was still here. He was still alive. On one of those mornings, Cole reached out, his hand trembling, and scratched behind Max's ears. The dog responded with a soft wag of his tail, his body moving slightly in that unmistakable way that only a dog could do when they were happy to be near their human. The gesture was small, but it meant everything. It was a symbol of Cole's return, of his healing, of the bond that had been forged between them in the most unlikely of circumstances. Max had been the bridge between life and death. And now, as Cole began to rebuild his strength, Max remained his constant companion, a silent reminder of how far they had come. Lily stood by the window, watching as the world outside shifted with the changing season. The days had grown warmer, and the sky, once dark and oppressive, now held a soft, promising light. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the soft hum of life outside the hospital seemed to beckon them forward. It was as though the entire world was telling them that it was time to move on, time to embrace the future that had been so uncertain just days before. As the hospital room grew quieter, Lily began to let herself imagine the life they would build once Cole was fully recovered. The uncertainty, the fear, the sleepless nights, they would all become memories. They would fade into the background of their lives, leaving space for the new chapter that was waiting for them. The door opened, and the nurse entered with a soft smile. "Good news," she said, her voice gentle but filled with warmth. "We're ready to discharge him. Cole's vitals have stabilized, and we believe he's strong enough to continue his recovery at home. He'll need regular follow-ups, of course, but we're confident he's on the path to recovery." Lily felt a surge of relief, and her heart fluttered with joy. It was time. It was really happening. They were leaving the hospital. They were going home. She turned to Cole, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she saw a smile, a real smile. It wasn't the weak, pained smile of a man on the brink of death. It wasn't a smile born from necessity. It was a smile that came from a place of pure joy, the smile of a man who knew deep in his bones that he had been given another chance. Cole extended his hand to Lily and she took it, her fingers lacing through his. Max, sensing the shift, stood up, his tail wagging energetically as though he too was excited for what lay ahead. The dog looked from Lily to Cole, as if checking to make sure they were both okay, both ready to step into the world again. As they made their way out of the room, Cole taking slow, deliberate steps, Max trotting happily beside them, Lily couldn't help but feel the weight of the past few days lifting. They had been through hell, but they had come out the other side, stronger, united, and full of hope. They were leaving the sterile, quiet halls of the hospital and entering a new world, one where their love, their bond, and their resilience would carry them forward. Max, the quiet hero, trotted ahead of them, his ears perked and his tail wagging in steady rhythm. He led them out of the hospital, guiding them toward the door, toward the sunlight that was now streaming into the world outside. The city, the world seemed to greet them with open arms, as if welcoming them back from the brink. The sky was clear, the air fresh, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting its golden light over the horizon. It was a new day, a new beginning. As they walked to the car with Max at their side, Cole and Lily exchanged a glance. The unspoken truth between them was clear. They had survived. They had fought, and now they were ready to rebuild. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. There would be challenges ahead, of course. But they had each other, they had Max, and together they would face whatever came next. Lily paused for a moment and looked down at Max, who was now standing next to the car, his eyes bright and full of life. She bent down, scratching him behind the ears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Max's tail wagged even faster, as though he understood, as though he had known all along that his purpose was to save them. And in that moment, Lily knew that no matter where the road ahead took them, they would always be together forever.